How do you think that a settlement, you say that if a satisfactory settlement were reached with Israel, then they could be given a normal place in the life of the Middle East, is I think what you're saying. How do you propose that the settlement should be reached? What would you say of the Yaring mission, the mission of Dr. Gunnar Yaring, the United Nations envoy? Is that the way to go about it, or should there be negotiations with Israel or an exchange of declarations? What is your view of the way the settlement should be approached?
Well, of course, in order to reach peace, we have to give up, or the Israelis have to give up expansion. If they insist about expansion, there will be no peace. From the statements of all the Israeli leaders, they speak about expansion. Both Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, and parts from Sinai, and parts from the Western Bank. So, if we want, or if the world community want peace, they must feel that peace don't mean expansion to any party. Then after that, Israel was created by the United Nations. So in order to achieve peaceful settlement, this must be through the United Nations.
Through the United Nations?
Yeah.
Through the Yaring mission or through other means?
Any means. It is the same.
The Israelis, as you very well know, have repeatedly said that they want to sit down face to face with the Arabs. They prefer that method of approach, or keep saying that they do. What is wrong with that from the Arab point of view? I have just been in Paris, for example, where the United States is sitting down with the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. What is wrong with direct face-to-face negotiations? I might add that the negotiations in Paris are not proceeding very rapidly, but nevertheless they are going on.
Well, of course, the question is different from the meetings of Paris. Now there is a nation, country with their armed forces occupying big part of the Arab territories, Sinai, the Western Bank of Jordan, the Golan Heights in Syria. So if we sit with them on a table to negotiate terms for peace, we'll be sitting on a table of capitulation. We'll be in the strong situation. And, well, they will ask, either we accept their terms, they will be in a position to dictate, or they will not leave the occupied territories. And, well, that's what they say today. They say today, either the Arabs do so and so and so, or we will not evacuate the occupied territories. So, as I said, Israel was created by the United Nations. The United Nations was responsible about all these developments in this area, about all these troubles in this area. So we think better to have the peaceful settlement through the United Nations.
Do you feel that a four-power guarantee of any settlement reached with Israel would be desirable? Do you want such a guarantee, or do you feel the need of such a guarantee?
Well, I think if there is a guarantee to the settlement, we prefer to have this guarantee through the Security Council. The four powers are members in the Security Council.
When you say a guarantee by the United Nations, would you envision then a restoration of some kind of United Nations force in this area?
Well, of course, these are details. If we have United Nations forces in this area, these forces have to be according to our consent and according to the Israelis' consent. And we think that these United Nations forces have to be astride the borders. And, well, if there is peace really, if the Israelis agree to solve the two main problems, and the first main problem is the land, that is not to keep the occupied territory, and the second main problem is the people, the Palestinians. If they agree to give the Palestinians their rights according to the United Nations resolution, there will be no trouble in this area. There will be peace. So there will be no need to the international forces or any other means.
You alluded there indirectly to something that might be of interest, and that is, you said that the United Nations force would have to be here by the agreement of the Arabs and the Israelis, and that they should be along the borders. I believe that this implies that you would not consider the demilitarization of the Sinai Desert, which is the largest part of Egyptian territory now occupied by the Israelis. Is that correct interpretation?
We haven't said anything about the demilitarization of Sinai Desert. This was said by some of the Israeli leaders or military people. But if we agree about the demilitarization of Sinai, well, that we will be giving the Israelis opportunity to be in Cairo within 12 hours. Because if they move from the borders through open Sinai, one will not be feeling at all security. And if there is peace, why we agree about demilitarization of Sinai? If the Israelis ask about the demilitarization of Sinai, this means that they don't want peace or they don't intend peace.
Can you envision a situation where the United Nations might simply supervise the borders, however, and leave Egypt in full occupation of its territory, that is the Sinai Desert? Can you envision a United Nations force patrolling the borders, at least in the early stages of a peace settlement, in order to avoid incidents?
Well, I think these are details to be discussed to achieve the peaceful solution. You know, in 1956, the recommendation of the United Nations was to have a police force, international police force, in the Israeli side and in the Egyptian side. But there was only one condition, that's to have these troops with the consent of the countries. We agreed, then the Israelis refused, and then the police force continued for 10 times. When we asked the withdrawal of the police force, well, there were protests from the Israelis that we asked the withdrawal of the police force, but they refused to say, or people forgot to remember that they refused 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago, to have police force there. By having the police force on either sides, this will give security to everyone. If they don't consent to have the police force, there will be police force on our side. If we withdraw the police force, there will be police force on the other side of the borders.
I see. The question comes down then to this point, it seems to me. What measures would you take to provide the secure borders that is mentioned in the United Nations resolution? What measures would be taken? Simply the signing of a peace treaty, or the signing of a peace agreement, or a declaration of peace between the powers? Or would you take any measures at all to...
Well, there are many measures, but the most important one is peace. If there is a solution about the territory, about the withdrawal of the Israelis from all the occupied territory, and if there is also solution to the Palestinians' problem, and implement the United Nations resolution according to their rights in their homeland, well, there will be no problems after that. There will be no reasons for tension.
Is it realistic to expect, however, that Israel, which wishes to be and has constituted itself as predominantly a Jewish state, would accept a very large number of Arabs back into their territory?
Well, why not? The Jews and the Arabs, the Christians and the Muslims were living here in the Middle East for centuries, for thousands of years. The Jews were living here in Egypt, and they are living here in Egypt, in spite of the propaganda which was used against us in your country, that we don't treat the Jews well. You can go all over the country and you can see the Jews. Some of them asked to leave the country, and we refused. We agreed, and then they refused to leave the country, and they said that they want to stay. We arrested Jews, about 80 Jews. But we arrested also, after the war, Muslims and Christians for the security of the country. The Israelis now are arresting more than 7,000 Arabs from the occupied territories and Gaza. So I want to say again, the Jews and the Muslims, the Christians, the Arabs were living here for centuries.
As a matter of information, how many members of the Jewish community in Egypt are left now? How many are still remaining?
We have here about 5,000 Jews.
About 5,000?
Yeah.
And how many, you say, under detention now? 80?
About 80, yes. There were more than that, but
some have been released.
Yes. So I want to complete my explanation. We are living together, and there was no hatred. We said that it is well known, but I think some people have forgotten that we and Jews are cousins. Moses was born here in Egypt. We were always living in very good conditions. So why the Muslims and Christians, the Arabs and the Jews don't live together?
Then it seems to me that it might be impossible, granting the position of Syria, which has refused to enter into any kind of discussions at all on this matter, that a settlement might have to be reached between one or two of the Arab states in Israel. Is that conceivable to you? Is there any objection to that from your point of view? That agreement might be reached, for example, by Jordan with Israel separately, or by the United Arab Republic with Israel separately?
You know, if we agree about solving or settlement this question between Egypt and Israel alone, this means the continuation of the occupation of the Arab territory in western bank of Jordan and the Golan Heights. Then when we speak about the withdrawal of the Israeli armed forces from the occupied territory, we mean the occupied Egyptian and Jordanian and Syrian territory. So if they only withdraw from one country and continue on the other countries, there will be no solution or settlement.
And that is clearly not satisfactory to you.
Yes, yes, of course, there must be a complete evacuation from all the Arab territories.
We have often heard it said, and how true it is I don't know, I want to ask you, that no Arab leader, no Arab government could actually sit down at a table and negotiate with Israel and sign an agreement. Is that really the case?
Well, I want to tell you something. On 1949, on February, well, we sat with the Israelis on a table, and there was a representative of the United Nations, Punch, and we agreed about arms. We know about the arms agreement of 49. What happened after that? The Israelis refused to implement the arms agreement, and they said this agreement is dead. These are the Israeli agreements, and that's why we insist about the United Nations agreement on securing any settlement.
I believe that I'm interpreting you correctly when I say that, let me first state Israel's position in this matter, and I'd like to hear yours. Israel holds, I believe I'm correct in saying, that in order to establish the secure and recognized boundaries that are provided for in the United Nations resolution, that there need to be some adjustments in the borders in various places in what was formerly Palestine. Are the Arab states, or you personally, prepared to see any such adjustments? I'm speaking now of border adjustments, not of large areas of territory. Are you prepared to agree to such adjustments or not?
Well, if you remember the Security Council resolution, it was said about secure and recognized boundaries, not for Israel, but for all countries. Now Israel is trying to give the impression that secure and recognized boundaries is only for Israel. So we have to reach agreement about secure and recognized boundaries in connection with the Israeli interests. But in the Security Council it was not mentioning the Israelis, it was mentioning all the areas. Then let me say something for you. Our borders were here for years and years, centuries. So how anybody could ask me to agree to give him adjustments in these borders, or on other way give him parts from our territory.
If a peace settlement were reached with Israel, what would happen to the Arab commando groups that are now operating against the Israeli occupation forces? These groups, Al-Fatah and the others, I think, have said that they would not support the 1967 resolution of the United Nations. Would they be disbanded? Would they disappear? What, in your opinion, would happen to them?
Well, first of all, we have to say something about these groups. These groups are formed from the Palestinians who were expelled out of their country by 1948. Those groups are composed of the Palestinians. Those in 1967, the rest of their country was occupied. All what those people want is to achieve their rights, to return back to their homeland. I told you, without solving the problem of the Palestinians and giving them their rights to return back to their land and the complete withdrawal of the occupied territory, there will be no peace. We'll be speaking about something which nobody will be able to fulfill. So if there will be peace, this means that the problem of the Palestinians will be solved. So there will be no big problem for them.
You think that these groups would dissolve automatically or naturally?
You know, peace, if we achieve peace, real peace, as I said, peace means the land and the people. If we solve the problem of the land by the evacuation, if we solve the problem of the people by giving them all their rights according to what was said by the United Nations resolution, well, there will be real peace. Well, then we should not worry about the Palestinians' commandos.
Is American policy, to use Governor Scranton's phrase, which has now become so familiar, is American policy more even-handed in your view?
Well, of course, the first thing which we feel that we are not dealing with Rostov brothers. Rostov brothers, I think you know them. One of them was in the White House, the other one was in the State Department. They were representing the point of view of Israel, not the point of view of the United States. Excuse me by saying that, but this was our impression. And also, you know, your representative in the United Nations by that time was defending Israel more than the Israeli representative. This was Goldberg. After leaving their posts, of course, they are now giving statements which are clearly let one know that they support 100% the point of view of Israel. Now, well, we don't have the Rostov brothers, we don't have Goldberg. There is a new administration and new people dealing with the question, but just beginning.
Do you think this is an appropriate time for you to reestablish diplomatic relations with the United States?
Well, I'll tell you something. Of course, we like to have diplomatic relations with the United States. But of course, in order to have these diplomatic relations with the United States, there should be a change, of course. Until now, there was no change in the policy of the United States. All what we want from the United States to be fair and to be just in dealing with this problem. We don't want the United States policy to be in our side. We don't want the United States policy to support us against the Israelis, but we want the United States policy to be just in dealing with the problems. We want even-handed, as it was said when Governor Scranton visited us before January.
And the answer seems to be that you are not yet convinced that American policy is such that you would want to reestablish relations just now.
Well, of course, the main point is the occupation and the evacuation of the Israeli armed forces. Of course, in order to establish relations, there must be a clear situation by the United States. And it is a question which is affecting our internal policy, because we will say to our people, we will resume the relations because of so and so. So we wait for that to happen.
Do you think then that the United States is in position to require the Israelis to withdraw?
We hope so.
Well, before we end this conversation, President Nasser, I think we should take advantage of what is really a rare opportunity for you, and a rare opportunity particularly for our audience, an opportunity for you to address to the American people, personally and directly, any message you like. What would you like to tell the American people that I haven't asked you about?
Well, I think that I have to say to the American people that they have to understand us, the Arabs, and not to listen to the hostile propaganda which is concentrated against the Arabs and against us, especially in the United States. And the Israelis are very, very influential and very clever in that field. I want to say also to the United States people that the Arab people have great appreciation to the United States people, and while the Arab people are friendly people and they want to have the opportunities for good and better relations between the two peoples, there is no direct conflict between the United States and the Arabs. The only reason for conflict between the United States and the Arabs is the Israelis and the United States taking the sides of Israel. We want the United States and United States people to be even-handed in this problem.
Well, as they say in Washington, thank you, Mr. President, and goodbye from Cairo.
Not all, thank you.